for how I approach things is I think the Bible is rather straightforward and is very much a linear document in terms of telling a straightforward narrative and doesn't bounce around back and forth and things like that. So when I see war in heaven in Revelation 12, I would say that that is a second war in heaven, and it's the last stand. And you may want to call it Custer's or Hillel's last stand, but it's the last stand. And the reason why I say that is, number one, just what I just said, that this is the culmination of the end time and the epoch of Adam and the fulfillment of the Gentiles. And so we know all along that there was a rebellion of angels beforehand. What's not always clear is when exactly that took place, but what we do know is it took place in prehistory for sure, and then there's speculation on exactly when that happened. But I think what's going on here is you look at some other analogies, kind of makes it kind of clear, is that we know that the fallen angels and Satan have been deceiving people for millennia on millennia and creating these polytheist religions and secret societies to deceive people, and they deceive people that, you know, Satan is the equal of God and that he has an ability to win. Well, Satan already knows he can't win. Satan wasn't trying to overthrow God because he knew that was impossible. I think what he was trying to do and this really comes out in Gnosticism and in fairy mythology, is that he wanted to have a separate realm, that he could be like God in a separate realm. And with their rebellion, that's what they were trying to do, which of course isn't going to happen, and they did not get. And so he knows, even as he teaches the demons and he teaches the leaders of the false religions, that they can't win. And that the end is already determined, and we know that through prophecy. But what they teach in the religions and the secret societies is they can win, and they will win. And they continue to deceive people with that doctrine. And so the analogy now comes back is, let's take Star Wars as an example, which would be some terrific polytheism with that type of Babylon type religion and good versus evil, all this dualism. And they've got the roles inverted because they look at themselves as the children of light and the rebels. And this is going to become important when later, and we understand that these terms are important when we talk about Satan later. And is there a difference between, you know, Lucifer and Satan and the fall of Satan? So when we understand that they're telling us that they're going to have to fight for their freedom, and in this case, in the Star Wars analogy, against the oppressive regime, that they are telling the followers of their polytheist religion that you are rebels and you are the good force, so to speak, and you're fighting against the dark force, and that the only way you're going to gain your freedom is you have to fight, and you can win. And so when all of this comes to sort of full fruition in the end time, then people of the earth are going to be told you have to fight for your freedom, along with however they represent themselves. Are they gods? Are they fallen angels? Are they aliens? I don't really care, because it's all the same in terms of how they're deceiving the people of the earth to fight against the oppressive ruler of the universe, which is our God, as they would portray them, because they look at God as evil and as Satan as the God of knowledge, the God of light, the God of freedom, and the one who looks after the interests of humankind. And they view God as the oppressive God who enslaves humankind in this physical world just to worship him and tries to keep them enslaved in the physical world. Whereas Lucifer is promising and or Satan is promising that you are going to be gods. So when this war happens, this war is going to extend up into the heavens, just as the Antichrist will raise his throne into the heavens and cause to do battle with some of the heavenly realm and even hurt some of them, although you can't kill an immortal being. this will look like a full-scale galactic, whether it's alien or gods, however you want to look at it, fighting it out. This is going to take place, and it's going to take place in our skies. And I think they're going to be thrown out of heaven to be locked down in the earth for the last 3.5 years as the bowl judgments are poured out and the wrath of God all comes about. So that's quite a mouthful, but that's kind of how I see it. And I'm sure there's probably going to be a few questions to maybe clarify a couple things I might have. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, why would anybody want to wish for the day of the Lord? I mean, if you're talking about the people of Israel and Judah or Christians in that aspect, yes, you know, we know at the end of that wrath and tribulation is the future world, and first the millennium and then the future world. But why would you want to go through that? I mean, it's going to be horrible. And it's not clear that everybody is going to be raptured away or protected from what's going on, because clearly I see two horrible genocides or holocausts or slaughtering of people en masse, let alone the wars and the nuclear holocaust that's going to take place both in the first half and the second half. So, I mean, it is not going to be a pleasant thing to go through, and I don't think anybody should wish for that, although for a Christian, I mean, the outcome is going to be good. But I think it's as much directed at the foolish people who want to bring this rendezvous with destiny on, as opposed to a Christian that's looking at, you know, I know we have to go through this, we don't have to like it, but on the other side, they are chomping at the bit to bring this about, and the sooner the better. And they've been trying to bring it about ever since, you know, the creation of Adam. And I also look at, you know, Revelation 12 as being so, and we're going to come back to it, you know, later in the show again, but I mean, it absolutely, you know, describes Satan as a being that is, you know, not only, you know, an angel, as we'll get into a little bit later. I keep jumping ahead on this, but you know, he's described as the serpent and the dragon and the devil.
Yeah.
And those are very, very significant terms. Again, just relating all of that back to him being certainly part seraphim, and I'll connect that a little bit later as well. So when we talk about seraphims, that's the seraphs, and that's the serpent allegory. And of course, you know, a serpent with wings is a dragon. So you have this sort of full circle of what these meanings are. But I also look at, when I look at Revelation 12, there's a lot more going on in Revelation 12 than what, you know, like what people think. And the first thing that people, I think, get confused about Revelation 12 at times is that they're looking for a sign in the sky, and they're going to be deceived by that through astrology and other formats. I mean, I know there's some astrological alignments that are coming pretty soon that people think is the sign of Revelation 12. You also have the Mary cults that are out there, where you have the woman and the stars and the moon, and perfect description of that. Now that's going to have a play in the end time, and they're going to send out their prophets of doom to try and bring people into the universal religion through fear. But I think people need to be very, very careful about accepting those kinds of allegories as opposed to what it actually is talking about there. And what it's talking about there is, you know, a war that's going on that's going to overflow into trying to destroy the people fleeing from Judea, where the dragon spews out something like a river to try and slaughter them en masse. And this is so significant. And so that takes us right back into prehistory. And in prehistory, we know at a certain point in time that not all of the angels reported to announce themselves before God, and that's what Job is talking about, and when Satan is traveling in afterwards. But there's a time when the angels rebel in prehistory. And is that after Eden? Is it before Eden? That's where the speculation comes in terms of the exact timing. But one of the reasons why they rebel, other than the fact that, when we talk about Isaiah 14 and Ezekiel 28, is where you're going to hear about the pride of Satan and how he rebels, and there's sin found in his heart. I mean, this is the heart of the rebellion that happens at some time in prehistory. So I don't want to go through everything that's in Isaiah and in Ezekiel, but that's where you'll get some indication as to when this rebellion happened. And one of the reasons why the rebellion happened is that Lucifer wanted to have his throne raised to either at the same level as God or beyond God. And he wanted to be worshipped like God, and he wanted to have his own realm, and he didn't want to follow their own rules. And he's one of the greatest creations ever created by God. And he takes a third of the angels with him in this rebellion. But they're not summarily judged or dismissed. There's some sanctions put on, and they probably have some freedoms put on, but they're still permitted to continue what they're doing, which is kind of odd. And then along comes, and again, that's when it gets into, do you believe it's before or after Eden? But you have Adam being created that just infuriates the angels even more, because he's being created that in the future world, the descendants of Adam are going to be raised above angels. And in fact, humans are even going to judge the angels to a certain degree, and for all of the different things that the angelic realm has done to humankind over time, including, taking part in the fall in Eden, which did not stop humankind from being able to be promoted in the future world. It's just God is greater than free choice, and God set out a free choice right in the garden this time, so that they could either choose to follow the ways of God, or they could listen to the tempter and eat from the tree of good and evil. But no matter which way it was going to go, God would overcome that through free choice, and it's going to have the same ending. It's just we're going through the painful aspects of it, because Adam and Eve chose poorly to be independent of God and to learn about all of this knowledge, just as things would have been a lot smoother and easier if Israel would have just fulfilled their covenant. But we have to go through the curses of the covenant as opposed to the blessings of the covenant, and so it's painful. But the fallen angels have been trying to either enslave humankind, obliterate humankind, or ensure they don't have their inheritance. And of course, that's where the Messiah plan came into play with the Redeemer Jesus and the resurrection, and that's why Jesus went to visit the angels in the abyss, the impassioned angels in the abyss, who created the Nephilim, which is one of the things that the fallen angels did to have revenge against Adam and humankind. That their plan was officially over because the resurrection was about to happen the next day or so, because Jesus is visiting them while still in the grave, and that their fate was already sealed. So all they can do now is deceive and lead more people to destruction and cause more problems. And, they certainly have resilience to say, okay, we're doomed, but we're still going to be as evil as we can. I don't know how to, it's just amazing that, I guess it just shows you how far their spirit had turned to evil, that even though they know what's going to happen, they continue to do more evil.
Do you think that the book of Job gives a little bit of an insight of how the ranking system works, that even God was, Satan had to meet with God before he did the things that he did to Job?
Yeah. Yes. I think so. And certainly I think that was one of the great mysteries of what's going on over this great drama that's been playing out, that has the angelic rebellion as the sort of the backdrop of this whole thing, is that now you have somebody named Satan as opposed to what his real name is, and it certainly isn't Lucifer. And he has a special commission to be a tempter and the adversary of humankind. And
yes.
It's like he's there not only to destroy humankind, but God is using him because, again, God is greater than free choice, to sift the ones that are truly going to choose God and follow his ways, as opposed to their angels who were created immortal and had no choice. And the only choice they had really was to continue to follow the laws or rebel. The trouble is they're already created immortal, right? They can't be killed. Can they be destroyed? I don't know, but they can't be killed if they're immortal. Whereas humans were created mortal, and we're going to choose to follow God's way before we have some form of immortality given to us. Satan walked amongst the fiery stones. He's part of a very, very elite group. He may have even been a priest before the throne as an angelic priest. And so he would know the powers of God inside and out. And he would know he could never defeat him. But he rebelled anyways.
It's amazing how much Hollywood has shown some of this stuff, but from their angle. But yet it's a lot of the same imagery of what you just said. I can actually, I'm picturing the scene in the movie Thor or Clash of the Titans or whatever one's showing the gods meeting. And I hate to use that reference because I don't believe that at all. It's just that the imagery of that setting, I don't know. Maybe it's the way that they brainwashed me into believing that's what heaven looks like. But his realm.
That's what it's all about. People need to understand that the secret societies and the mystical religions, they have a lot of inside information, and so and a lot of it's misinformation. But they have information that they are trying to get out there all of the time, and we need to be very, very intelligent in our discernment and very, very critical in the way we look at things and ask tough questions, not only about what they say, but we need to also ask tough questions about what the Bible says so that we become stronger in our faith. Okay? So let's talk a little bit about these people that are affected in Revelation 12. There's this great sign that happens in the sky with the woman, as we talked about later. And without getting into too much of the allegory, let's move on to what happens after the battle in heaven. And it's really very, very important for people to understand this. That Satan is wanting to have total revenge as much as he can, and he's going to take it out on Israel, not just Judah, Israel and all the tribes. And in this case, we have these people that are fleeing, which is all of Israel, which is talked about in Revelation 12. And the serpent spews water like a river to overtake the woman and sweep her away from the torrent. And we move back up to the top just so that people understand there's a great wondrous sign that was in heaven and clothed with the sun and the moon. And I'm going to go through this just so that the audience understands that it has a crown of 12 stars on her head. She was pregnant and cried out in pain and was about to give birth. And then it goes on. So this is talking about the 12 tribes of Israel and the Messiah. And so the woman, she gave birth to a son, a male child, who will rule all the nations with an iron scepter. So we know who we're talking about here. This is Jesus. And her child was snatched up to God and to his throne. So we know about the resurrection. And the woman flees to the desert, to a place prepared for her by God where she might be taken care of for 1,260 days. So this is a mid-trib event. And this is the 12 stars or the 12 tribes. This isn't just Judea. This is all of the tribes, and this is significant. But if we want to go back to narrowing it down and then expanding it, then we need to go to like Matthew 24 and look at the abomination. And this is a very, very, very key set of prophecies that's going on in Matthew. And it says, when you see standing in the holy place the abomination that causes the desolation, let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Okay? So the people who are in the country of Israel today, whom they're talking about, are going to flee when the abomination happens. And this happens at the midpoint of the tribulation again. And it also says, pray that your flight will not take place in winter or on the Sabbath, and not to be pregnant. And this is going to show in a few lines just a little bit further on that there's going to be a trumpet blown, and they're going to collect the elect from the earth, which is a very strong allegory for trumpet and timing for the rapture. And so this is the time of Jesus coming, and I'm going to get to that in a few minutes. But I want people to understand that these people in Revelation 12 who are fleeing to the desert, which are the whole 12 tribes, is part of the same prophecy of the people in Judea and Jerusalem that are going to flee at that time of the abomination because the wrath is about to come. Have I lost anybody yet?
Well, I just wanted to ask this: is it possible that what Israel is actually more of a spiritual Israel? It's more of not necessarily in a geographical location, but what Judea means, and then also when it says going into the desert, can't the desert also mean wilderness? Going into a place where you got to have your faith with Him. There's nothing you're going to be, no matter what, you're in a desolate place, and I've heard that argument. So, I mean, what do you say to that? Is that a possibility? That what if the Israel that we're thinking of today isn't necessarily the Israel of Scripture?
It's a bit of both, but you have to be very careful with people inserting allegory in stuff that's not allegory. Now, the Bible is so powerful in its words that it can have a couple of meanings, and so it can have a physical and an allegorical sense. But this is not an allegory. This is a description of what's going to happen in prophecy. And so, yes, it could be very much in the wilderness in terms of their faith, and that is a good reference to the lost tribes of Israel. There's no doubt about that. So let me just sort of say, let's say it's going to be physical, and I'm going to come sort of around back to that. But I'm going to just put that out just as a bit of a look forward to it coming in a few minutes. And then it moves on into, it says, and I just want to underline that when you go into Matthew 27 to 31, there's going to be, for as lightning that comes from the east is visible even in the west, so will be the coming of the Son of Man. So there's going to be a banner in the sky, and that's another prophecy marker that's in the Old Testament. And wherever there is I'm not going to go into that, but the sun's going to be darkened, the moon will not give its light, and it moves on and it says, at that time the sign of the Son of Man will appear in the sky. That's the banner that they're talking about in Isaiah. And if I get time, I'll reflect on that a little bit later. And then He'll send His angels with a loud trumpet call. So what I'm suggesting to people is that Jesus is coming for two reasons: for the people fleeing and for rapture. And it's all neatly there in a narrative in the Gospels, and Matthew and Mark are particularly good at laying that out. So let's just talk about this a little bit more. If we go back to Daniel, we're definitely going to get the timing of how much time between the abomination is set up and the sort of the end of the days, and it's like 1,290 days, and it also says, blessed be those who wait and reach the end of 1,335 days. So we're talking mid-trib, and we're talking some extra days in here that may not be fully accounted for in the Revelation, which is 1,260 days. But I just want to make sure everybody knows that the timing I'm talking about is the abomination that's confirmed in both the New Testament and the Old Testament. And I'm not going to go into a whole bunch about the trumpets. I just want people to understand that the trumpets are a marker, and you can follow those trumpet markers for timing in Old Testament prophecies. It's very, very important. It's the days of the trumpet. So if we move on to what is this river? This becomes very, very important. This is going to start to tie the Israelites back in. So let's go back to Isaiah 27. And it says, in that day, the Lord is going to thresh from the flowing Euphrates, or a river, to the Wadi of Egypt, and the Israelites are going to be gathered up one by one. And in that day, a trumpet will sound. That's another one of the markers. That's Isaiah 27. So in this end time prophecy, we have a Euphrates River being referenced as what we're seeing a river in Revelation 12, and we're talking about the Israelites as opposed to Judah. And in a prophecy, here's one of the things that I follow. When you're talking about prophecy for Israel, you're going to apply all of that to the northern tribes. And all the ones that are prophesied for the southern tribes or Judea, it'll say Judah when it refers to it. And also at the northern tribes, you need to follow Jacob and Joseph and the primary prophecies of Isaac. When those names are used, or Jacob, that those are going to be to the northern tribes. And those are the ones that were dispersed in the Assyrian apocalypse as opposed to the Babylonian apocalypse for violating the Holy Covenant. So we're talking about the Israelites being gathered up one by one in that day at the time of the trumpet. And so when we go back to Revelations, we go further down into Revelations 12, they're going to be carried by the wings of an eagle to safety. Well, if we go back, that only happens one other time in the Bible. That's in Exodus 19, and it says something to the effect that how God carried them on eagle's wings and brought you forth to himself. It's the only other time those wings of eagles are used. So we're talking about an Exodus. And if we're talking about an Exodus, then we're talking about something greater than just the people of Judea that Matthew's talking about. We're talking about the 12 tribes that were talked about in Revelation 12, and I've already related the Israelites from Isaiah, just so that we're talking, everybody understands I'm talking about a second Exodus here.
That makes a lot of sense. That just filled in a pile of blanks for me.
And now let me start pounding this home, because that was just sort of a overview just to connect a few dots. So if we go back to Isaiah 28, we have a couple interesting things going on in verses 15 to 19. The first one is it talks about a covenant of death. And I know a lot of people don't like to talk about the covenant of death as being the 7-year tribulation period. I know people don't like to talk about tribulation of 7 years, but let's say the last 7 years or the 7-year deal that's signed in Daniel. But I'm going to connect it right now, tonight, with the same timing, and everybody should understand that that world peace treaty that secures Israel, their safety, is also the New World Order Treaty and the formulation of the 10 empire, or as I would like to refer to them as groups of nations or spheres of influence or economic zones or trading blocks. There'll be 10 of those that are formed and bound by this covenant. So Isaiah 28...
Isn't that the United Nations? Isn't the UN, haven't they presented a 10-region breakdown as well?
Yes, it's not clear to me whether or not that's identical to what the Club of Rome has been working on, but yes, they are definitely trying to fall in line with that 10...
It's definitely a pattern.
There's a pattern there. So whether or not it's totally
Gotcha.
identical to what the secret societies have been trying to form, but there's going to be 10, and I don't care whether the United Nations agree with the Rosicrucians or not.
Right.
That's their own business. What we know in prophecy is there's a 10 king empires. So gotcha. It says when you've entered into a covenant of death with the grave, and you've made that agreement, and then it goes on, when an overwhelming scourge sweeps by, it can't touch us, for we have made alive their refuge and falsehood gods and things like that. So hail is going to sweep away the refuge, the water will overflow their hiding place, and the covenant of death will be annulled. And that's when, and it goes on later, when an overwhelming scourge sweeps by, it will carry you away morning after morning, day by day, in the evening, and the understanding of this message will bring sheer terror. so what this is talking about is at the midpoint, God is annulling what the world and the people of Judah and the lost Israelites have signed on to in this covenant of death. And now they're fleeing for safety, and they're going to have to run from Satan and the fallen angels and all the minions with them who are going to try and destroy the nation that brought forth the Redeemer. So let's now move into Zechariah. And I'm going to talk about Zechariah 9. And in Zechariah 9, it talks about, the Lord's going to appear, and he's going to appear over people. This is the banner that the Old Testament is talking about. This is the sign from east to west that Matthew's talking about. And then the sovereign Lord's going to sound the trumpet. Again, that trumpet is a key marker here, and it's denoting the time. You've got the trumpet, you've got the banner, and then it moves on to say, the Lord their God is going to save them on that day as the flock of his people. Okay, so we've got the banner coming together, we've got the trumpets, we've got the Exodus, and we've got Jesus now being suggested possibly here as going to be the one that's going to save them on that day as the flock of his people. That's Israel, not just Judea, but I haven't nailed that point yet. So now if we move into Isaiah 43, again doing some more linking here because there's a lot of prophecy here that goes to support Revelation 12. It says, Israel, I have summoned you by name, you are mine. When you pass through the waters, that's the river that is being talked about in Revelation 12. It says, he's going to be with you. That's Jesus. And when you pass through the rivers, they will not sweep over you. And he's going to walk through fire, and they will not be burned because they're going to be attacked, and they're going to be drawn from the far ends of the earth. And he's going to bring all of his sons from afar. And this is, again, talking about Israel. And we go back to that point when we talk about Israel. These are the northern tribes. These are the lost tribes. Well, I think there is, and I'm in the process of writing a book about the second Exodus and the lost tribes and possibly who they are. I don't know, without making it as big a book as I did on Genesis 6. I'm going to try and get some of that in, but I think if you go to the prophecies of Moses and the prophecy of Jacob, those are end-time prophecies as to what to look for those nations in the end time. And
awesome.
So, right? So, without tipping, too much on that one. So let's now move on to what Micah has to say. Micah 2 is where I'm moving on to. But it says, and there's so many more. I'm just doing some quick highlights here for you. And in Micah 2, it talks about, God will surely gather you, Jacob. And when it talked about Jacob, we're talking about Israel, right? The northern tribes, as what I talked about a little bit earlier. I will surely bring together the remnant of Israel. I will bring them together like sheep in an open pen. And the one who breaks open the way will go before them. They will break through the gate and go out. Their king will pass through before them, the Lord at their head. So Micah is clearly talking about the Messiah, and as Christians would understand it, as Jesus leading and gathering Jacob. And what we learned from the last passage, it's from all over the earth. And so that will include even the Jewish people, the remnant of the Jewish people around the earth as well, and the people in Judea. So we're talking about all of them, even though there's specific ones for Judah. So now if we move back to Isaiah, and I know I'm moving fairly quickly, but we don't want to be here forever on this. Isaiah 49. And it talks about, just so we know who we're talking about, it says, he made my mouth like a sharpened sword. Okay, just so everybody understands, we're talking about Jesus here. This is the sword that comes out of his mouth and destroys all the evil forces in Revelation, what is it, 20, I think? To be, his servant to bring, this is, now the Lord says, he who formed me in the womb to be his servant to bring Jacob back to him and to gather Israel to himself. So again, we know it's going to be Jesus that's going to do this. And it goes on to say it's too small of a thing for Jesus just to be a servant to restore the tribes of Jacob, which is the northern tribes, and bring back those to Israel. It's going to be a light for the Gentiles. So again, that also nails it as who Jesus is, and that brings salvation to the ends of the earth. So this is again nailing that it's going to be Jesus at the time of the rapture, at the time of the trumpets, is also going to be doing the Exodus. This is going to be an absolutely astounding period of time in the future of what's going on. And then we move on to, quickly, let's go on to Ezekiel 37, which is right in about some other interesting prophecies when we look at the Gog War, which is happens towards the midpoint of the tribulation, and that's the war of the Gog and Tubal, and which is the Russian and Persian and Arab alliance that are going to try and destroy Israel, and God defends them. So this is talking about in that time frame, in that narrative, that the verse that I'm going to pull out here. And it says, take a stick of wood and write on it, belonging to Judah and ones belonging to Israelites associated with them. So this is underlining my point about where you apply the prophecies. Then it says, take another stick of wood and write on it, Ephraim stick. So as I said, Ephraim again is the northern tribes, right? It's the son of Joseph, just as Manasseh is as well. And belonging to Joseph and the house of Israel associated with them, and join them together into one stick. So they're going to join Israel and Judah at this time, back into one stick. Okay? So again, that's Ezekiel 37 if people want to go back, verses 16 to 24. And it goes on to say, I'm going to take the stick of Joseph, which is in Ephraim's hand, and of the Israelite tribes associated with him, and join it to Judah's stick, making them a single stick of wood, and they will become one in my hand. And I will gather them from all around the world and bring them back into their own land, and there will be one king over them, and they will never again be two nations or divided into two kingdoms. And my servant David will be their king over them. I can't think of a clearer verse that says, that connects the Exodus with Jesus leading the Exodus, and that they're going to put Israel and Judah back together, the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom. 7 shepherds, even 8 leaders of men. This is talking about the Exodus. And he will deliver us from the Assyrians. So you can understand the Antichrist and Satan working together, and the whole world trying to slaughter Israel and Judah. And when he invades our land and marches into our borders, the remnant of Jacob will be in the midst of many peoples. These are the lost tribes. And the remnant of Jacob will be among the nations in the midst of many peoples. And your hand will be lifted up in triumph over the enemies, and all your foes will be destroyed. And in that day, which is wording for the end time, I will take vengeance in anger and wrath as in the bowl judgments, starting at the midpoint of the tribulation, upon the nations that have not obeyed me. And that comes out of Micah 5. So again, just sort of underlining the time with the Antichrist and the wrath, and just sort of connecting all of that. And then Micah 4 also has an interesting connection to Revelation 12. And again, it starts off, in that day, I will gather the lame, I will assemble the exiles, that's the lost tribes and the Judeans and the tribes associated with Judah around the world, and I will make them a strong nation again, and the Lord's going to rule over them on Mount Zion from that day and forever. And so it moves on. Why do you now cry aloud and have no king? Has your counselor perished, that pain seizes you like that of a woman? I'm reading this just to do it quickly. Of a woman in labor. That's Revelation 12, the woman in labor. And, O daughter of Zion, woman in labor, you must leave the city to camp in the open field. That's when they're fleeing from Judea, Revelation 12. And it moves on a little bit later on, and it says, but now many nations are gathered against you. And they say, let her be defiled, let her eyes gloat over Zion. But they do not know the thoughts of the Lord. They do not know the understanding of his plan. He who gathers them like sheaves to the threshing floor. So this is all happening all around Revelation 12, and all the allegory and all the symbolism and all of the timing is exactly the same. We don't know whether or not, God and Jesus are going to save all of them or not.
Okay. Well, I would say that he'll save every single one of them that come to him, but none of them who don't. So right, like
exactly.
He says, "I'm the way, the truth, and the life, and no man cometh to the Father but by me." So,
and then that's what I was going to add too, is when if he's going to save all the tribes and that's the only ones that are getting gathered up, what about those that are grafted in?
Well, those who are grafted in, that's the new covenant, right? This is talking about the Holy Covenant, the first one. So Christians have a different path than what the Jewish people do. So, let me just sort of explain that. So when we get into the end time, the Christians are going to be naysaying this whole thing all the way through, but until the midpoint of the tribulation, when the abomination happens and the Exodus and the rapture happens, I know a lot of people have different opinions on when the rapture is, but nonetheless, the Jewish people are participating for the most part in this New World Order, right? And they're not even expecting that the one who's going to save them is going to be Jesus. But they will realize that at that time. So the Christians, some are going to be raptured and some aren't going to be. And some people are going to be tried through fire in the last 3.5 years as well as what the Jewish people and the lost tribes are going to be tried. So there's like two different things going on with different types of genocides. Have I made myself clear on that, or did I make it more fuzzy?
Yeah, no, I get it. So basically what you're saying is the Christians, or those that were not part of the original tribes, those that are grafted in, they're going to go through all 7 years. They're not going out at 3.5.
Not unless they're raptured, because Jesus is coming at the same time to do the rapture.
Okay, so how do you distinct who gets raptured out in the midpoint?
Well, rapture is for Christians. Exodus is for Israel and Judah.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
And then not all Christians are raptured, only those, I would think, who are more pure and more faithful and more, but it's not all Christians, right? Well, we have people, and this is, if we understand that what's happening in Judah and the lost tribes as sort of one narrative that's going on in Revelations, you have all of these other people who are bearing the testimony for Jesus in the second half and being beheaded, right? And didn't take the mark. And then also in the first half of the tribulation, you have this persecution that went on that Babylon does. So there's two persecutions. You have the universal religion in the first half that's persecuting the Christians. And then you have the Antichrist who destroys Babylon at the midpoint and then persecutes the Christians in the second half. Yeah, and again, I'm not trying to wedge Christians. I'm just saying here's what the Bible says. And I think you can, if you take as many or all of the verses and set them side by side, it tends to tell a complete verse, but I'm sure there's going to be lots of people who disagree with me. And I could also use a thief of the night argument of Jesus coming that's right at the end of the tribulation if I wanted to use one single verse, but it doesn't fit quite with all other verses as to what the timing of the rapture would be or the timing of the Exodus. But we do know Jesus comes at the end anyways with the armies from heaven to do the final battle. So, you could go sort of back and forth on that one. But I think when you line all of the verses up, it tells a very straightforward story. But if you leave verses out conveniently, you can make it do whatever you want it to do. Let me talk about the last trump then. So the trumpets lead into the wrath bowls. and everything that we're talking about with the abomination at the midpoint. So if the last trump is mid, which I believe it is because it's a fairly straightforward narrative if you read it that way, and then it lines up with the abomination and with the Exodus and Revelation 12, I think we've got a pretty good sense that it's the last trump is the midpoint of the tribulation. Judah, out of you will come me one that will be ruler over Israel, and whose origins are from old and from ancient times. Therefore Israel will be abandoned until the time when she who is in labor gives birth, and the rest of his brothers return to join the Israelites. That's Micah 5:2. And, if you just read then Revelation, 12, she gave birth to a son, a male child who will rule the nations with an iron scepter, and her child was snatched up to God and to his throne, and the woman fled to the desert to a place to be prepared for her by God where she might be taken care of for 1,260 days. So again, that Micah 5 and Revelation ties both of those together in terms of the allegory and the timing. And the desert is a physical place, and we talked about the Euphrates, and we know the Euphrates is in the river, and we know that Euphrates has several dams on it that I think are going to be released and try and destroy the people of Judea fleeing to the desert, and the people of Israel from around the world are going to that same place, right? And they're going to be protected there. Now let's move back to the Holy Covenant. This is key. It says in Deuteronomy 13, it says, when all of these blessings and curses, and remember I talked earlier that we have to go through the curses of the covenant because Israel and Judah did not live up to their holy covenant, and so we have to go through it through the curses. And it says, so when all these blessings and curses I have set before you come upon you and you take them to your heart, wherever the Lord God disperses you among the nations, and when you and your children return to the Lord your God and obey him with all your heart, then the Lord your God will restore your fortunes and have compassion on you and gather you again from all of the nations where he scattered you. Even if you have been banished to the most distant land under the heavens, from where the Lord your God will gather you and bring you back. This is part of the Holy Covenant. God knew that they would not live up to it. He knew if it went through the curses that would happen. And again, God is greater than free choice, that both the northern nation first would be dispersed and lost, that Judah would be dispersed after the Roman one, and also taken to Babylon in the first apocalypse against them. But in the end time, God would remember them, and they will awaken to remember who they are. And if we move on to Revelation, I'm just going to link this one in. It says, but in the days of the seventh angel is about to sound his trumpet, the mystery of God will be accomplished, just as he announced to his servants, the prophets. And so again, that's the seventh angel, and the trumpet, again, is a clear marker as to this whole mystery of God, this whole mystery of the covenant, this whole mystery of people being grafted into the covenant, and the Exodus and the rapture are going to be bound at that time. And if we look at Isaiah 11, it's interesting again because it says a shoot's going to come up out of the stump of Jesse, and from his roots comes a branch. And in the day of Jesse will stand as a banner for the people, for the Lord will reach out his hand a second time to reclaim the remnant that is left out of his people from Assyria. He will raise his banner for the nations, and he will gather the exiles of Israel, and he will assemble the scattered people of Judah from the four corners of the earth. So it clearly has Judah, Israel separate there. We're talking about that banner. This goes back to where Jesus is going to be seen from the east to the west and all over the earth at the time of the abomination, at the time of the trumpet. And it's such a powerful linking of all that we talked about when you go back to Isaiah 11 as a bit of a summary on that. I mean, the Holy Feast will tell us sort of what's going to happen through prophecy, because that's what they're also designed to do. But we have to understand the Holy Covenant. the original Holy Covenant that's never going to be forgotten, and it's going to be fulfilled to the letter of the law. And so if that's the case, then the physical descendants of Israel are going to wake up in the end time, and they're going to be exited back. And I just find it so enlightening when we understand that we have to look at the role of Judah and the role of Israel, not just the role of Christians, when we understand end time prophecy. And it just helps illuminate what is going to happen. No, I understand a lot of people think that they're concurrent, but I believe they are linear as is the rest of the Bible, and it just makes no sense that you've got different proportions of disasters and people being killed that are different in each of the categories, right? You have so many different types of disasters going on in the last 7 years that you've got several occasions where you can expect that to happen. I mean, you've got an Armageddon war. Right? Okay. You've got a Gog war. You've got Gog being destroyed. You have a whole bunch of things going on with the opening of the seals that happened earlier on. You've got earthquakes. You've got volcanoes. You've got a conflagration of disaster events that you're going to see the skies darken on a regular basis, I would think. What happens at the end of the sixth seal kind of makes it kind of clear, is that we know that the fallen angels and Satan have been deceiving people for millennia on millennia and creating these polytheist religions and secret societies to deceive people, and they deceive people that, Satan is the equal of God and that he has an ability to win. Well, Satan already knows he can't win. Satan wasn't trying to overthrow God because he knew that was impossible. I think what he was trying to do and this really comes out in Gnosticism and in fairy mythology, is that he wanted to have a separate realm, that he could be like God in a separate realm. And with their rebellion, that's what they were trying to do, which of course isn't going to happen, and they did not get. And so he knows, even as he teaches the demons and he teaches the leaders of the false religions, that they can't win. For how I approach things is, I think the Bible is rather straightforward and is very much a linear document in terms of telling a straightforward narrative and doesn't bounce around back and forth and things like that. So when I see war in heaven in Revelation 12, I would say that is a second war in heaven, and it's the last stand. And you may want to call it Custer's or Hallel's last stand, but it's the last stand. And the reason why I say that is, number one, just what I just said, that this is the culmination of the end time and the epoch of Adam and the fulfillment of the Gentiles. And so we know all along that there was a rebellion of angels beforehand. What's not always clear is when exactly that took place, but what we do know is it took place in prehistory for sure, and then there's speculation on exactly when that happened. But I think what's going on here is you look at some other analogies, and you are the good force, so to speak, and you're fighting against the dark force, and that the only way you're going to gain your freedom is you have to fight, and you can win. And so when all of this comes to sort of full fruition in the end time, then people of the earth are going to be told you have to fight for your freedom, along with however they represent themselves. Are they gods? Are they fallen angels? Are they aliens? I don't really care, because it's all the same end in terms of how they're deceiving the people of the earth to fight against the oppressive ruler of the universe, which is our God, as they would portray them, because they look at God as evil and as Satan as the God of knowledge, the God of light, the God of freedom, and the one who looks after the interests of humankind, and they view God as the oppressive God who enslaves humankind in this physical world just to worship him and tries to keep them enslaved in the physical world. Whereas Lucifer is promising and is already determined, and we know that through prophecy. But what they teach in the religions and the secret societies is they can win, and they will win. And they continue to deceive people with that doctrine. And so the analogy now comes back is, let's take Star Wars as an example, which would be some terrific polytheism with that type of Babylon type religion and good versus evil, all this dualism. And they've got the roles inverted because they look at themselves as the children of light and the rebels. And this is going to become important when later and we understand that these terms are important when we talk about Satan later, and is there a difference between, Lucifer and Satan and the fall of Satan? So when we understand that they're telling us that they're going to have to fight for their freedom, and in this case, in the Star Wars analogy, against the oppressive regime, that they are telling the followers of their polytheist religion that you are rebels. And or Satan is promising that you are going to be gods. So when this war happens, this war is going to extend up into the heavens, just as the Antichrist will raise his throne into the heavens and cause to do battle with some of the heavenly realm and even hurt some of them, although you can't kill an immortal being. This will look like a full-scale galactic, whether it's alien or gods, however you want to look at it, fighting it out. This is going to take place, and it's going to take place in our skies. And I think they're going to be thrown out of heaven to be locked down in the earth for the last 3.5 years as the bowl judgments are poured out and the wrath of God all comes about. So that's quite a mouthful, but that's kind of how I see it. And I'm sure there's probably going to be a few questions to maybe clarify a couple things I might have. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, why would anybody want to wish